I'm really happy, I'm delighted, I'm proud to have Katie Hill with me from B Lab UK. B Lab UK run as a non-profit in support of B corporations in the UK. And it's Katie's role to actually, I suppose, drive the launch and drive the awareness campaign around B corporations in the UK. And in a moment, I'm just going to invite Katie to tell us a bit more. For all those who missed Jay Cohen-Gilbert's session, I'm going to invite Katie just to, first of all, tell us about her career and also talk a bit more about the great work that B corporations are doing, not just in the UK, but throughout the world. But first and foremost, Katie, thank you so much for joining us and being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Lovely to be here.
Excellent. As I was saying, Katie, we'd love to know more about you, more about your career, and what led you to be in your current role with B Lab and B Corporation UK.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, I mean, I suppose it's a long journey, and I'm an old lady, so it's not been. It's taken a while to sort of get here. But I think probably I knew I always wanted work that had some form of kind of real intention and purpose to create change. But I think I thought that had to have a kind of label or a badge, like a nurse or a social worker or something which you immediately identify with, kind of, working for someone else's benefit. And I think it took me quite a long while and a lot of wrong turnings to realise that actually you don't have to. Those jobs do fabulous things, and I would have loved to have been all of them, but they're not the only ways that you can make, I hope, change and impact. So through a circuitous route via various different jobs, mainly working in economic development and employment and personnel development, I've landed up working in the field of social investment, which was trying to design the right sort of finance that organisations such as charities or social enterprises really need to be able to finance their work, where there isn't really a clear market. It's not like a normal product where you're trying to actually sell a good or product. You're actually dealing with a social need, and that needs very different sorts of finance. So I was working in that in the UK, and from there it was a relatively natural move over to B Lab, which I can tell you about as well.
Yes, please. Yeah, it's like you said, it was a circuitous route, and I think many people through their careers have taken that avenue themselves. So it's not unusual, and I suppose it teaches us a lot. So as you said, you've ended up with B Corporation and B Lab UK. Tell us more about that. Tell us more about what you're doing there.
So B Lab's really new to the UK market. We've just launched in September 2015, and what we're doing is building on the work of a global movement to identify those companies, mainstream companies mainly, who are for profit but want to do far more than just create profit, and they feel they will create more profit and be more successful and more sustainable if they also really look after their employees and their community and their suppliers, and they're governed well, and they engage their workers and their directors in the business as it is in fullest sense. So B Corps are ones that have reached the highest level of performance in terms of creating social and environmental impact. They've gone through a test that we assess them with. They've gone through a review process. So they're clearly best in class in terms of how they are actually behaving. But then they've also gone to another step, and they've locked in their commitment to create this social and environmental impact by changing their articles of association to reflect this long-term commitment for the greater, more societal benefit. So these two elements are what a B Corp has to go through, and this is the exciting movement we're developing. In the UK, there are now 90 signed up certified B Corps, which we're really thrilled to have. Everything from Ella's Kitchen to Lily's Kitchen, lots of kitchens, big work providers like Ingeus. We're very excited, and some small startups doing all sorts of exciting things like Yoti and incubators such as Bethnal Green Ventures. And globally, there are about 1,760 across the world, everywhere from Australia, New Zealand, Latin America, Canada, everywhere. So it's really part of a systems for change to say, how can we make this capitalist system work for the benefit of all? How do we create a lasting and durable prosperity that's not just shared by a few, but shared by many? And business has a really big role to play in that, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think business has a massive role to play in, making things better for people and planet. And anybody who's looking for work in terms of impact, to both those areas I just mentioned, I think your starting point should be looking at B corporations, not least to get ideas of the sorts of businesses that are doing it. Because I think a lot of people, as you alluded to in your introduction, Kate, do you think that it's all about the role? That they may think they have to be a nurse or a social worker in order to make that impact, but you'd be surprised at the extent and the range of businesses that are making impact,
Yeah.
and not necessarily working as nurses or whatever it may be. So it's great work that you're doing. So thank you for that.
Well, no.
What I'd say is though, Katie, and I think I work for B Corp myself, and my journey was towards one of purpose, I think, and it was only when I found working, I suppose, in a for purpose, that I got my real sort of my contentment, my happiness, and I felt it was really meaningful work. To you, Katie, I mean, what does working with purpose mean to you, and what does it mean, and why is it so important, would you say?
And it's a really difficult question because I think it changes all the time.
Yes.
What is that purpose, and what is it about, and how much is it about you, and how much is it about the other person, and how much is it about whether you think you've got unique things to offer, or whether it's just you're the person there at the time and you can do it and it needs doing. So I think purpose can be quite functional as well as rather ideological and sort of about the spirit of persons. So I think there is the sense I'm not so sure about this legacy view of purpose. I sort of feel it's about the here and now. It's about what needs doing now. Am I in a position to do anything about it? Can I gather people around me who can do it with me? Can we make some difference right here, right now? And if we try it and it doesn't make a difference, can we do some iteration of it? So I'm not sure so much about I used to think, you have to have a long-term view and it's got to be kind of mapped out, and purpose is one great big long journey. It probably is, but I think, it can be there are very many sort of pathways to select on the way, and it will be jerky and not very clear. But I think if you're just sort of clear, if you're sure that you can contribute to something right here, right now, that's probably the best we can do to act on our intention to create meaningful outcomes.
And I think that word contribution is key, because there are people, I suppose, who go to work who don't necessarily feel as though they are making a contribution to anything. They're just getting their paycheck from month to month. So I think that word in itself says a lot in terms of doing something that's meaningful, that has a real sort of impact in many ways. And to make that change as well, I suppose, to get into that mode of thinking, at least, it may take some, I suppose, some change of mindset, or from a perspective of a recruiter, which has been my role for many years. I think lots of people, when they go about their job search, they won't necessarily think along the lines of the contribution that they can make. They'll think about basically the paycheck first and foremost. So there is a transition involved, a certain mental transition, and an actual transition, I suppose, in many ways. Some people might feel a sense of trepidation in terms of making that transition, Katie, because you get so used to doing the day-to-day things. How and I suppose, what does it mean, or how do you overcome those that trepidation, so that you become, I suppose, able to take that risk?
Well, actually, it's interesting you asked that question, because I think that was a much greater risk in perhaps even 15, 20 years ago when I was working, where jobs were much more for the longer term. Things didn't appear to be quite so kind of transitory and moving quite so fast. So it was a little bit easier, I think, to kind of almost get stuck in a rut if you weren't careful. I would say now that's quite difficult, because whether you're in public sector or private sector, things are moving so fast that almost not to jump on the bandwagon and try and move into something new and take a sort of jump that is actually a very risky strategy. To be risk averse is now a highly risky strategy, if you can say it. So,
Yes.
because you will be left behind. So I do think almost the mindset that first has to change is I don't need to know everything first about how I'm going to contribute. I just need to know that I need to try. So I was quite lucky and lived in many different European countries. And in each time, I didn't know what I was going to go to do, what I was really, I was usually setting up something which hadn't been done before, all of which was quite risky. There was no evidence there was no sort of format to follow. But each time, we probably could have done it better. Maybe I didn't do it as well as I could have done. But they were the way for me to be able to find a role in the place I was then living in. And at each time, weird things appeared and opportunities arose. Running a social enterprise in Bulgaria, I didn't know what I was doing, but it seemed to make sense to try because the vision of it was really good. It just appealed. And I learned so much from doing that, way more than I would ever have learned if I'd stayed risk averse and said, no, I'm a policy person. I know about policy. I don't know about business. And as a result, in fact, I then ended up on this track and going back to business school in my 40s and making an extraordinary set of friends who are now, like sort of brothers and sisters. Well, they could be my children, actually, probably. But so this is really an interesting way. It just took a turn and I didn't expect it. But it was hugely rewarding. So probably that's something in the mindset is just not to be frightened, because if you do stay still, things might move around you and you might be left.
Absolutely. Do you think then that's something to do with you as a person, or is in terms of your personality that allows you to take that, I suppose, that risk? And did you actually see it as a risk?
No, I think I saw it as a survival because, I landed up in Bulgaria. We were moving there for family reasons, and I didn't know how to engage. I didn't know how I was going to I had to learn the language and didn't really know how to engage. So actually working in an organisation which was really focused on the needs of a particular category of people in Bulgaria, I just got completely flung in. I learned far more about the place than I would have done any other way. So it was almost the obvious thing to do if someone was offering me that opportunity, really. It would have been very odd not to take it in a way, because I would have probably not had a way of engaging in my environment, which would have been a bit miserable. So no, I'm sure lots of other people do extraordinary, what I think are genuinely brave things. This was sort of almost, why wouldn't you?
And I think, by the sounds of it, you took almost a calculated risk, probably without realizing it. And I think, is the lesson there then that just take a leap of faith, or is it about being calculated and making sure that you've got a safety net, if things don't work out?
Yeah, you're probably right. I think everybody's personal circumstances have to come to bear as to what you're risking, what's at risk. But I suppose I would also say I wouldn't think over hard about things if it sort of pulls you in somehow, if something comes onto your radar and it pulls you in and it appeals to your sense of purpose and contribution and collaboration, which was very important for me. I really wanted to be part of something that other people were part of too. I didn't want to be doing something on my own. Then I would say that's probably the starting point. And then obviously if the risks do look outrageous, you would want to really consider those and stack them and think about it. But mostly these things I think the risk is that you don't take them, and then you are kind of feeling a bit, I missed an opportunity there and I don't have a skill set I really would love to have now.
And I think that's another point you've made there, is that I think when you're on a pathway to something that you really like doing and really enjoy and love, you get pulled into it, but you find a way of making it work, don't you? You do everything in your heart and your soul to actually, to make sure that those risks are minimised, and you just go all out to, like I said, make it work, don't you?
I think so, and I think there's this sense at the moment. I mean, for your generation, Alex, you were all going to be working for a long time. You hadn't worked out already, so you have to have a very different strategy to the existing. My parents, they were really kind of calculating between 21 and 58, 63, something like that, and there were perhaps 1-2 key job moves if they were lucky. Those days have gone, and now 2 to 3 years is the average length of time people are staying in jobs. Even CEOs of the FTSE 100 companies aren't staying for more, up to 5 years. So the whole way that your career path is stretched out now is totally different. It involves multiple changes, really reactive to new opportunities. And that means you've got to be pretty nimble and skill savvy, be able to sort of turn your skills that you learnt for one thing into another. And, if you don't get that, then your likelihood is that the marketplace will leave you behind. Mm-hmm. So I think probably without even realising it, I was probably banking some skill, thinking if I bank that and bank that, it's going to help me to be able to keep going in other purpose-led jobs that I might want to take.
And I think a conversation I had with I think it was Leon, saying that, have employers also want to see that change in your career. They don't necessarily want people who've stayed in a role for like 10, 15, 20 years, because that gives you they can see that you've got the agility, the ability to, to get on with different people, to assimilate things quickly and work in different environments. So that's, again, another great point, another benefit, I suppose, of having those things in front of you and having those changes on a regular basis. And I don't think we're not saying job hopping by any means. We're just saying, be in a position to be able to transition on a regular basis and keep up to date with what's going on now, I guess, in many ways.
And I think one thing which I think is really important, and B Corps I think are very aware of this, is that it's really incumbent on the employer to think about how they are helping to build the skill sets of their employees, because no longer will they be able to sort of rely on a fairly constant environment with constant skill needs. They're going to need their employees to be really flexible as new things come down the line. So I think this is where it's both on the employees and on the employer to think about how do we build careers that are going to be 40, 50 years even, and are going to have multiple demands and skill sets in a way that we never used to have. So I think there's a real interesting element there about midlife training and professional development, about opportunities for learning in a different way, so you don't have to come out of a job and not earn. I know we obviously do have opportunities for that, but really well recognised and well established ways of doing that, so that people are able to continuously they can be a scientist and they can be a creative landscape designer in the period of 5 years. It's possible to do all these things and bring all those skills to the next job.
Yeah, and that's probably one thing in my encounter with job seekers. That's one thing that probably holds people back is assuming that your career is almost like set out for you in a certain path, and you have to sort of follow that path, and it's very rigid to move from this path to another. But as you said there, it's one of those things that you have to be quite nimble with and be able to navigate quite easily. For all those doubters out there who may still be quite risk averse, I'm actually quite risk averse myself. But for all those people who may be sceptical about some of the things that we're saying, how or are there any ways that you yourself, Katie, minimise the risks that you had, or are there any ways that you could suggest that people might be able to minimise risks?
Yeah, I think it is about sort of testing and trying things out, whether it's through volunteering with an organisation that you think might be of interest to you. If particular, say, for example, if it is a not-for-profit who is working in a special area that you're interested in, makes eminent sense to explore that, work as a volunteer or a mentor, find out whether that particular area is of interest to you, so that before you then sort of change track necessarily, and whether you work in the not-for-profit or profit area around that sort of theme, you've got some idea of what it would be like on the ground. So I just think talking to people and get learning, we can't do everything firsthand. You do have to be able to learn from other people's experiences. So, you need lots of conversations with people who are doing things that interest you, so that you can assimilate what they're telling you, and knowing how to ask the questions that give you the answers that help you make your decisions. So I do think there's a huge amount about building community of people around you who are there for advising each other and for communicating with each other, which is very much back to B Corps, what we're doing, so that the B Corp community is really there to support each other, and as they go through difficult decisions around profit and social impact and all of these things. There's people there who've also gone through that and help each other with that decision. And then I've never had this, but I believe the role of a mentor, the right mentor, can make a massive difference.
Absolutely.
And I don't know what you probably have far more experience. Like, I really want to find a mentor, because I think, someone could really help just sort of almost understand the things you can't see about yourself, perhaps. So that's another potential way to kind of help you take the risk, but not explode into such risk that you feel out of depth.
No, I agree. And I think, again, one thing I used to do, and a thing that I know a lot of people tend to do, is they feel, for whatever reason, that, it's my job, it's my career, I've got to manage it on my own. They don't necessarily reach out to people who can help them, people who've been there and done it, who can actually tell them the pitfalls and all the benefits, etc. And as well as that, I suppose your point on mentors, it's something that everybody should have, because they're going to be, even if you're working in the most perfect job, there are going to be days where you need to speak to somebody to get something off your chest or to get some sort of advice, etc. So that, to me, I have my mentors, and I have friends as well who I can turn to, who can, I can speak to and sort of just unload everything, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's really important. You need a network. We all do, don't we? We're creatures of we're humans designed to communicate and to support each other. So
I think
that's a very important part of it, I think.
And I think, again, the beauty of the B Corporation in terms of what I found myself is that, you feel a lot more confident and comfortable in speaking to people who have a similar mindset to you, or similar goals to you, as opposed to just speaking to anybody. So I think the point you made on finding a community that is similar, is like-minded, is also important. So
absolutely.
Just get away from your desk as well and meet them and speak to them.
Exactly. Very inspiring to speak to many of these people doing incredible things.
Absolutely. And then, Katie, on to our next question. How do we manage, I suppose, a meaningful career change over a lifetime of work? So, because I know there's many factors in play. How do we manage that?
Goodness. And I think it is a really challenging sort of thing to do, I think, because it's just permanently changing. One's own circumstances are changing, and both, internally in your own life, but also around you. So I think it's a very individual process, but I suppose it is about almost just being able to sort of understand yourself well enough to know what barriers you might find to being able to take next steps and change and move. And the other thing I did find was, and perhaps this is more of a feature of having had kids and then sort of trying to keep back into the job market, was I don't think we need to try and do everything all at once, but we probably don't want to let key things drop off entirely. So if you're really interested in, I don't know, music, or being involved in learning a language or something, which you think might have a role for you in future work life, I just think, even if it's just a drip, 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 I think keeping those lines open. So for me, in my sort of work area, I had periods where I didn't really have an ability to work massively long hours or at hugely high levels or anything, but just keeping engaged in the workplace just meant I sort of didn't find there was this awful jump back in again at later stages. So there are probably equivalents for, not necessarily for women going back after kids, but at different points, if people have had time out for whatever reason, that sense of jumping back in again can be a bit daunting.
Absolutely,
if you've not kept threads going. So I'm sort of a great believer in keeping things dripping on, even if they don't satisfy you and you feel you're not sort of necessarily improving or doing them to your best ability. I think it's to some extent it's a question of just deciding if that's important strand you want to keep hold of and can build on later. But yeah, back to the earlier point, I just think also this is where employers can really play a huge role in helping to do really good appraisals and understanding of their employees and where their potential strengths might lie and how they can help develop those and harness them for the growth of their organisation as well as for the growth of that person. So it's a little bit back to a kind of, how much does the employee put in, how does the employer put that in, how do they work together to work really well. And sometimes that's about building people into much smaller units, into small teams where there's huge commitment to each other to deliver on something as well, where you have a great sense of sort of contribution and collaboration around a project or something. And you see that happening in big organisations like GlaxoSmithKline and others who are sort of breaking individual teams into smaller and smaller units to contribute to some specific project. And that seems to be a really exciting way of, within one organisation, moving into some very different new areas and new relationships.
That's wonderful, Katie. Thank you. And on to my next question in terms of, I know a lot of people, we've talked about, having the agility to move and to decide and minimise that risk. One question that comes up quite a lot is trends. Trends that can help people to actually minimise those risks and take a decision on a particular path. Are there any trends that you've noticed among your cohort of B Corps in terms of the types of businesses that are, either setting up or types of businesses that are thriving at all?
Well, I think particularly in the B Corp movement, what we're finding is that those ones that are slightly nearer to the consumer have most ability to influence the way we think business could be really, consumers can really influence how business is operating. My battery is very low. So I think we're seeing food companies, ethical fashion companies, products that are, children's products, where there's a really direct relationship between the company and the consumer. You can see that that's a mechanism which can be harnessed to create real awareness from the consumer, who will say, I only want to buy from companies that actually behave in a way that is really in line with my values. Much harder for consumers to be engaged where it's perhaps a much more hidden from view, a sort of B2B type
B2B,
model.
yeah.
But there, B2B can have a huge influence in how they treat their suppliers and their contractors and how well they act as a purchaser of services. So it's just a little bit more remote from the front of house and the obvious sort of noise around a movement, but it's equally important. And we see the fall-off rate of businesses that fail is massively influenced by how well and how quickly suppliers pay their businesses. So these things are really important in the growth of an economic system. Do you treat your supplier well? Do you pay them well? Do you respect them? Do you give them the time they need to deliver on the services? And that's all part of the change we want to see. And those trends, I think, are where I see the B Corp movement creating a really sort of best-in-class examples, which we would love others to follow and see that people are demanding it.
Yeah, and I think it's up to both prospective entrepreneurs to look at those trends, I think, and harness them, and also job seekers as well to look at those trends and see how they can actually build those into their own strategy for taking their career forward, because it's guiding you almost. It's like it's telling you this is the best way to do things. So
exactly,
putting your ear to the ground and listening to them is a good way to help you to minimise those risks. Katie, and what's in store? Is there anything particularly you'd like to tell us about B Corps that are going on at the moment?
There's a big festival, a bit like sort of Glastonbury for B Corps, in Wales on the 23rd to 25th of September. It's called B Fest, a wonderful B Corp called TYF, who work with all sorts of children and adults and young adults who are perhaps a little bit disaffected from life and the workplace. TYF are hosting it. It's a great big camp, or come under some canvas of some sort, for 3 days, dive in the sea, come and learn about B Corps. It'd be great fun. So check out B Fest at TYF, and we'd love to see any of you interested in the B Corp movement to come and join us and be part of a real celebration for change.
Excellent. And for all those interested in B Corps in general, what's the best website to look at?
Yeah, bcorporation.uk, all lowercase, www.bcorporation.uk. Come and check us out and get in touch. We'd love to see you. We have socials all the time. We're always networking or meeting up. So please come and see us. We'd love to hear what you're about, whether you're an individual or a company. We welcome you with open arms.
Okay, everybody go and look at the website right now.
Thank you, Alex.
Recommended. Thank you so much, Katie, for being with us, and we'll keep in touch with you and see what you're doing in the future as well.
And thank you, Alex, and for anyone listening. Lovely to be in touch.
Pleasure.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.